Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for your support. Buddhist hyperbole and non-specific words and terms. I had to put an entry in Buddhist references just to, once again, capture. It's a problematic, we come different cultures, different religious backgrounds, different influences. And those influences, they make their way into the language of the translators. How, of course they do, right? And no matter how staunchly academic a student, a doctor, a professor, an author is about being true to the source material, right? I would wager a guess that all of them will either say, yes, it's completely accurate, or more likely, if they're really an academician, say it's their best effort, right? But here's the thing. Shakyamuni talked about this all the time. Hell, the Lankavatara Sutra is a teaching that he taught for years and years on this very topic. That one of the greatest difficulties, and I have to say this as an aside, when Siddhartha Gautama first attained, had his Renge moment, saw and achieved his Buddha mind, he tried to explain the experience to the disciples that had followed him for years and years and watched him just work on himself. And sorry about that. The power just got bumped off. Hopefully that won't affect the video. Anyway, Mississippi. Anyway. What was I saying? Yes, so Shakyamuni's whole point in that sutra was that people get locked into language. And in the Lankavatara, in the first sutra, the Kigon Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra, it's known by different names depending on which culture, right? There it is. Huge book. I've read Cleary, I think it's Thomas Cleary, did a translation of the Avatamsaka. And oh boy, is it flowery. Talk about hyperbole, yeah? But Shakyamuni was trying to communicate with language the grandeur, the amazement of enlightenment. And he only taught it for like 2 or 3 weeks. Keep in mind, most of the sermons, sutras, he taught for several years, 8 years, 10 years, 6 years, 12 years. Yeah? The Lotus Sutra he taught for 8 years. So for him to have such a massive sermon as the Avatamsaka and to stop teaching after a couple, 3 weeks, what do you think happened? Even Buddha, an enlightened person, an enlightened mind, to be accurate, noticed that basically his students were looking at him with like, okay, that sounds great, but what are you talking about? They just didn't have the wherewithal, the experience, the mind to inculcate, to integrate this teaching into something that was real for them. Another Renge moment, yeah? So being enlightened, he backed off and thought, oh yeah, it took me 12 frickin' years to get here. 6 years wasted with Brahmins and, seers and almost starving myself to death, trying to achieve something they told me I could achieve and never getting there. And then spent 6 years on his own, determined. And finally he gets it, and then he expects these guys who've been waiting on him to suddenly, oh, we get it. right. He has to bring their minds, their sentient consciousnesses up to par, up to the capacity where, oh, I see how that happens. Oh, I see how to connect those dots. So he started teaching the very same thing, mind you, although more focused on how to get there than being there. Okay? And secondly, how to get there from your starting point. So all of his teachings before the Lotus Sutra were geared to the people's capacity at the time he was teaching them. And slowly, over time, over years, people became more adept. He changed the rules around practice because the rules were necessary to force people into situations where they would get it, right? Asceticism, monks, monasteries. That's all gone now. That's not necessary at all. Because we now live in a day, as foretold by Shakyamuni, where we all have the capacity to recognize how this works. We simply need to do it. That's why the Lotus Sutra is a teaching for this time, for these people, you and me, with our capacity to do exactly as he did, his process of getting there. This instantiation of simply move to what your mind can already do, but you've let it sleep through this because you're so enamored, distracted, fascinated by, glued to samsara. It's like trying to get your child away from the phone or, it used to be television sets. The kids would drool in front of their, come on, play, be in life, right? And now our big thing is phones and video games, right? It's the same problem. Well, samsara is like that. We're glued to it. And all Shakyamuni is saying is like, look away. Look away and see the grandeur of everything instead of this myopic little idea, because that's why you're suffering. That's why you're stressed out, because that's the world you're living in, and it's so small compared to what you're actually capable of experiencing and living, right? So, the Lankavatara Sutra is a sutra he taught much later in the early Mahayana. Some will argue the time period, but anyway. But the Lankavatara is focused on this very problem. Because now he's talking to an audience that can understand that you see how your mind gets in the way because you're so glued to the words that you fail to understand what's being discussed, the meaning, the underlying condition or tendency or truth that's being discussed, and you're trying to find it in the specific words. Stop it. Use the words to visualize, to reason, right? Move your mind from the data collection and make that data turn into information. What is this pointing to? Right? All the old, yes, pointing at the moon. If you look at the finger, you miss the moon. All of those analogies, they come from this. You see? So, Buddhist hyperbole in non-specific words and terms. First bullet point out of 4. Words with elaborate definitions designed to challenge our mind's comfortable expectations and parameters of thought in order to expand our understanding. Now I'm talking about specifically Buddhist hyperbole. So I'm not saying all words do this, but in the context of Buddhism, these words are used to poke a hole in something so that you don't seize upon the word, I know what that means, but rather what the word is being used to identify, to point to. Look for the meaning. And it's not just the words, although sometimes they are, but it's the concepts behind the word or the assemblage of words, a sentence. Right? You notice I do that all the time when I read a sutra or entries I've had in this book, and I'll stop at the end of a sentence and I'll talk about it. Because the sentence is not what's important, it's what the sentence is trying to convey that's important. Conveyance is the power of language. But if you stop short of the conveyance, language is useless. Number 2, words or surnames from cultural folklore and histories of varied cultures. Right? That goes back to my discussion on personages. A name isn't a name, it's a label for some what? Characteristics of the mind, characteristics of tendencies and conditions. I know you're out there saying, no, it's the name of a person, but what is a person? You keep drilling down and you find out, oh, like I'm fond of saying, it ain't a noun, it's a verb. Personing. 3, words are expressions to foster meaning and elucidations for meaning of the lesson at hand. Oh yeah, remember the context too. Right? You might read almost an identical sentence in several different books or movies and dialogues, let alone sutras, but they don't mean the same thing in each of those because there's a context those words are said in, right? Right? And 4th, words of definitions and terms from the more than 50 years of Shakyamuni's teaching life, describing various Buddhist levels of awakening, training, and so on. These terms are defined variously with slightly differing definitions throughout the internet. So if you go looking on the internet for what does he mean when he says this, you're not going to get one answer. And ultimately, as I was pointing out earlier with the Avatamsaka Sutra, the meaning that you get is your own. That's the important one, if you're looking for it. All right, so what did I write about this? There are a veritable dictionary of words used in Buddhist conceptual stories and lessons. Some are deliberately defined well outside the comprehension of normal day-to-day scales or, indeed, understanding. Other words, like Johanna and Ri, are common uses of measurement or estimation that have varied in value in their uses over time and cultures. Yeah, even words that say, well, Ri is so many camel steps in a day or whatever it is. Well, that, in another culture, in another time, that was the distance to the sacred mountain, or it was the distance across town, or how many men standing side by side, that distance. Everybody, every culture, you see what I mean about meaning? Words are very mutable, right? The important point here is twofold. On the one hand, Shakyamuni strongly cautions us, again via the Lankavatara Sutra, to fight the attraction or obsession with words and to put our attention to the meaning that the words are together trying to explore for our insights and deeper understanding for each of us individually. That's a mouthful, but pay attention to every part of that sentence, right? So, secondly, there are words like kalpa, for instance, are words defined repeatedly with lengthy descriptions that defy our mind's ability to conceive of them in any way other than fantastical. Well, that's the point. You could sit here and wrestle, and I've seen people discuss and argue, no, a kalpa is this or a kalpa is that. That's not the point. A kalpa is an unimaginable period of time. Well, what is an unimaginable period of time? I'll tell you what. Look at the picket fence analogy again. When you're sitting on that picket fence, Now, I said in the analogy, you sit there for 5 minutes and it seems eternal. But before it's over, that 5 minutes, where is your mind going as far as time? Right? Maybe that picket fence is starting to pierce its way through your jeans. You're feeling impressions on your butt, and now you're starting to wonder, am I poking a hole in my skin? Is that blood I feel, or is it sweat? Of course, you're asking yourself, well, get off the damn fence. But hold with the analogy for a moment. All of you have had an experience like this, right? We, in poetry or in movie scripts or in discussions about stuff like this, we would talk about the unimaginable torture of the wait, right? What is the torture? Is it time itself? Is it that we can't reason time anymore? When you really feel like you're at your wit's end, how long has it been? And somebody says, it's only been a minute. And you're like, no way. Right? That is kalpa. And you're saying, no way. It's like grains of sand and world systems and granulations. And it's just number too big to imagine. Yeah, that's right. And sometimes that number too big to imagine happens in moments. This is what so many people miss about Buddhist teaching. It is about the mind. How does it work? Right? I say attitude and intent. What's your attitude when you're feeling tortured about time? Could it be in some lower realms? Right? Connect the dots, my friends. That's what Buddhist teaching is about. How the mind plays and works on your experience of life. That's all Buddhism is about. The very fact that we practice Buddhism is to affect and alter that. It's about this life, this experience of life. Your experience of life is created, governed, and experienced through your sentient mind. That's what we're working on here. So don't allow the words to get in the way of your perception of that. Moving on. And that is precisely the point. These terms are not to be learned, quote unquote, in the sense that they are not vocabulary skills. Rather, they exemplify the unfathomable or the incalculable or the immeasurable nature of a particular insight or concept. Do you see? Recall the introductory sutra to the Lotus Sutra, the Immeasurable Meanings Sutra. Right? I talked about this in the Lotus lecture series. Why is it immeasurable meanings? Because there are so many sentient minds. The, quote, meaning to each and every one of us individually is going to impact, reference, and feel experienced within the huge context of our own life experience. We all may use the same words to talk about it, but they're not the same experience. Your experience is not my experience, or vice versa. This is why when they talk about itai doshin, many in body, one in mind, they're talking about intent. Intent in the minds of everyone to attain this full expression of each our individual experience of the universe, life. Do you see? So it's an important thing to constantly remind ourselves of as we're studying, as we're reading things. And you know what? It's a really good litmus test. Because I will read some Buddhist publications and I just spin my head at off, how completely personal or just erroneous some takes are on the same piece of text, because they're not observing this. They're taking it as read, as literal, and they're missing huge swaths of the teachings because of it. This is the problem with following earlier texts of Buddhism, because they're preparatory. They're not fully flushed out yet. And of course, whoever's practicing them hasn't gone past that hurdle yet. Yeah, they have the capacity. If they're alive today, they have the capacity, but they choose to get locked in. Talk about samsara, right? Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Please be kind to yourself. Take care of your health. Take a few seconds to like and subscribe. It's a bodhisattva act. It helps grow this Sangha, propagate these teachings. Yeah. So I thank you. If you've already done that, thank you. If you're just about to click off and go do something else, just take a second. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps all of us tremendously. And if you're more interested, buy a copy of the book. Get an ebook. Very inexpensive, and you can get it right away. If you like print books and you're in the United States or North America, it should be fairly easy to purchase one. It's just shipping these days is crazy, right? Or just make a donation through PayPal or Patreon, where you can get all these videos as well. Doesn't cost anything there other than your donation. And you guys, patrons, we call you. Everybody's a patron because you're all working toward enlightenment, yes? Kozen Rufu, as it were. World peace. Truly. Thank you for being a bodhisattva, for helping support this effort. And I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.
Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here.